part of regenerative ag, and I've had the great opportunity to be on thousands of farms across the state, across the Midwest, in fact, and I've seen regenerative ag. I've met Ray Archuleta 3 times. Gabe Braun, been on his farm in Bismarck, North Dakota. I've seen firsthand what regenerative ag can do. And before you leave today, I grew some, in the lobby, I grew some cover crops out there. One is a cover crop mix. The soils are just garbage soils. They're Nora Crofton soil. I threw some oats cover crop on there. That's regenerative practice. I mean, the things we want to do to regenerate, just leave the soil undisturbed, keep a living root there, keep it covered, and add livestock. So I put about $30 per acre for oats on that out there. The one that's really growing well, I want you to grab that on your way out and see some of the things that it's doing. But in just 14 days, that compacted, horrible Nora Crofton soil I put out there is starting to regenerate already. So that's one of my take homes, is the power and impacts of the things we can do with the soil.
All right, so I'm Ashlee Dere. I'm at the University of Nebraska, Omaha in the geology department, and my focus for research and a lot of teaching is on soil. So I really appreciate the love of soil that came across in this film here. And I like to think about soil in the context of the critical zone, which is everything from the vegetation down to the groundwater. And it's this very, very thin layer of earth that's supporting all life. And soils are an even thinner part of that zone. So when we think about all of us, all of our ecosystems, it's this very thin layer of our planet. And so soils are doing a lot of the water and gas exchange. They're supporting the plants, the vegetation, and of course us. So I appreciated that message and the role of carbon, just how important that is. It does get vilified a bit, but the reality is it's a really integral part of our life, and the capacity for soils to store that is quite powerful. And the timeline for that, that's been something that's been really impressive in my research here in Nebraska. I'm originally from San Diego, didn't know anything about this ecosystem out here, but just how rapidly the soils here can transform when you change, for example, to grasses or things that have deeper root systems. It's on the order of years or decades, it's not centuries. And that's been really exciting for me to realize that capacity exists in soils.
I did like how they pointed out, like, carbon's not the problem, it's where it is and how much of it is currently in the atmosphere. So Kisterkam does a really good job of highlighting, like, traditional farmers healing the soil through conservation agricultural practices. But most of us here do not have acres to grow on. And it's harder when you live in these urban settings. So, like, what can the average urban dweller do to promote soil health through, like, their backyard or through the small community gardens in this area?
Yeah, so with urban agriculture, in 2018 Farm Bill, we were able to, it kept referring to NRCS as the villain, so I hope none of you are still kind of felt that way, but I will say that it's very impactful. I mean, I've seen the city of Omaha, I think, has about 800 tax abandoned properties, and so access to land is part of that equation. So it's connecting the dots, I think, to find out the next answer to that question of locally produced food that's important of high quality and things like that. So there's things we can do, just like that cover crop I'm growing out in the lobby. Really simple, easy things to do to change your own destiny and provide for those who really need it most. And it doesn't take a lot of effort, really. So together, I think we can do a lot, and passing that message along to the next generation is important. So even though it's a small piece of land, it's equally as important as somebody in western Nebraska farming 20,000 acres in a more traditional sense. So I think passing that legacy on and the idea of regenerative ag and how important those soils are is something we all can do.
Yeah, I would agree that we don't need to do massive acres necessarily that we don't have, but anything we can do to keep the soil covered from that perspective, and then anything with deeper roots that will help open up those pore spaces. They talked about that early on, that there's that glue in there that helps open up space for gas and water. And anytime you can introduce roots into the soil, that will open up pore spaces. And one way that I think it In addition to storing carbon, it also helps with water infiltration, and especially in an urban environment where you already have a lot of non-porous surfaces, a lot of concrete, a lot of places that won't absorb water. That can be extra impactful when we get these intense rainstorms or big snowmelt events, that water has a place to soak into and go. And the more that pore space exists, the more capacity it has to infiltrate.
So the film discusses the harmful effects of modern industrial agriculture, such as the use of pesticides that contaminate drinking water or tilling of soil that kills microorganisms. Who is really affected by this? It's obviously not everyone is affected equally, but is it more in the rural area, or do we see those effects even here in Omaha?
Yeah, I think it's where your food comes from, knowing where your food comes from. There's been a lot of studies on where your food comes from. I know I read a study about 100 years ago, so 3 or 4 generations ago, families got, or an individual got about 90% of your calories from within, food grown within or produced within 10 miles of where you resided. And now that's less than 5%. When you talk to a food bank and 99% of their produce is coming from California and places like that, it really changes that narrative. So I think knowing those things are critically important, and I think being able to tap into all these pieces to better someone. I mean, food distribution is really interesting if you start looking at it, and for urban agriculture especially, like when we can pass that technology down to a generation to provide for themselves and give them access to land and the motivation to eat healthy food, I think that's really great for our future.
One idea on this is about the microbiology in the soil. That's something that we've only really recently come to appreciate, I think, in the last several decades, that there's just an incredible amount of life in the soil. And we just have the tools now with DNA sequencing, thank you, to actually identify what's living in there. And so we really don't understand yet how it's all interacting. And I don't know that we ever will completely because it's such a complex system. But it's something that I think about a lot, is that we are finding that how critical that life is to soils and how deep down it goes too. It's not just at the surface, it really extends deep into the soil. And without an understanding of those interactions of that life and how it responds to different inputs and different variables, it makes it really hard to understand what is the exact effect of putting this input, or what is the chain of reactions that happen when you change this part of the system. So it's something that we're starting to appreciate even more, just how complex that life is and how important it is.
So we'll do one more question before we open up for any other audience questions. But what barriers do you think we're really facing when it comes to adopting these regenerative practices?
Well, being in the NRCS offices, we have 71 offices across this big state, and I can tell you that I've seen a lot of barriers to adopting practices, and some of them on big agriculture are the bottom line. I think you heard Gabe Brown talk about that during the film a couple times, and how their farm subsidy impacted the bottom line. Farmers in any scale can carry a lot of debt to be able to participate in grow food. So sometimes we would see, we'll have a young person come in and they want to try a regenerative practice, and they've got their dad over their shoulder saying, no way, we're going to plow or disc or maintain those same practices that we're used to. So there's financial barriers that I have seen a lot. Sometimes there's access to land. So in the urban environment, there's getting just access to land. The simple thing of where do I put a seed is a barrier. And then for my example with father and son, a lot of social barriers where you got family and other reasons why you might not want to try a practice for regenerative ag. But I can tell you that there's a wave of new people getting into agriculture, and regenerative ag is an important topic. And I think it's continuing to grow in interest.
Yeah, I think the complexity of the system makes it a challenge because, there's a lot of factors at play here. And also it's a lot of work. So I think of, I have a research plot where I have to hand plant corn around some instrumentation, and the amount of effort it takes just to try and get that going, just on a tiny little plot, or if you have a garden, it's a lot of effort. And so I think that is one factor, is just the it does to restore systems, it takes a lot of work. And so one thing is the knowledge of how to do that efficiently, but then also having the time, the energy, and the resources to put into that.
Thank you, guys. I think we're going to go ahead and open up to questions.
Thank you so much. Well, and to the last point, it seems to me, though, that I'm sure you know that bringing more people on the land, more physical labor on land, restores towns, restores schools, restores communities. So, you know, we have not only a desertification, we have a loss of population, big time loss of heart, and high suicide rates in the farming communities. The other thing I just wanted to ask, though, is how are we changing our agriculture schools? What's happening in Lincoln? A lot of the funding is coming from the people who are creating the problem.
So I don't know if you are familiar with the extension program through UNL. They have a lot of really good practices, and it seems like that's a new push they're doing is in the direction of prioritizing soil health, prioritizing regenerative systems. Dr. Sam Wortman from UNL, he's part of the Nebraska Urban Soil Health Initiative. He has a lot of really good information on that. I think the issue is getting those resources out there to where people can find them for sure.
Yeah, to speak to that, there is a major push within the last 3 to 4 years for sure, where the money from USDA, I mean, we're the mothership here. That's just the fact of the matter. So a lot of our grant dollars now are being sent to our universities here in the state for urban small-scale agriculture, regenerative ag. She mentioned Sam Wortman. He has the Urban Soil Health Project going right now that we're funding. We've had a 6-year collaborative agreement with UNL to do no-till and cover cropping, and then all those results have been credited in on-farm research. So within the last few years, there's USDA is pumping a lot of money into our research institutions on regenerative ag.
And I can't speak to UNL. I don't know their program very well, but at UNL, Zee is a great example. We have awesome students who are finding their way through environmental studies programs or geology, and then just getting out into the soil. It has been, I've been really encouraged by taking students. We have a soil judging team where we go in soil pits and learn how to describe and interpret soils, and that just that very act of getting out and seeing the soil in your hands up close. I've been really encouraged by what that can do to help change the trajectory of some careers and opinions about soil. It's not just dirt.
Hi, I didn't catch in the movie. On these regenerative agricultural plots, do they stop using pesticides altogether?
Land.
Fertilizer, is that all just gone?
I could speak to that a little bit. So on in Gabe Brown's situation, yeah, he does not use any pesticides at all. He kind of left out a little bit about where his money comes from and how his system works, but mostly it boils down to the livestock. So he does have some cash grains that he has in rotation with cover crops, but he is trying to produce higher margins with his cattle. I know that the eggs with the free-range chickens you saw, I know I've heard him speak, he's getting 3 to 4 times the amount for his eggs in Bismarck grocery stores, just because the buyers know where the food comes from. He's not certified organic, which is interesting, but he's regenerative and sends this message that he's just not going to produce food with pesticides and things. So yeah, in his classic example, it is 0 pesticides.
I have a question about the chemicals. I live in an HOA neighborhood, and I'm the secretary of the HOA board. And I went ahead and took a lot of my backyard and took the grass up and rolled it up into sod and sold it and planted creeping thyme. And it doesn't need to be watered. It smells good. You can pick it and eat it. It's really beautiful in the spring. And so I went to the HOA board for one of our meetings, and I told them all about that. And they said, well, do a cost analysis study, and we'll do that with our overflow ponds, because in our neighborhood we have 2 of them, so that when really heavy rains come, we don't have floods. We just, all the water goes into certain places. So I found out that they are putting these chemicals on the overflow ponds. And I asked them what was in the chemicals, and they told me they have DDT in there, which is really bad for birds, and it goes into the groundwater for sure. And I'm trying to figure out a way to make them want to change, because you have to start somewhere. You have to change the mindset. They all compete for the best lawn. So everybody in this HOA neighborhood, they're all putting chemicals on their grass, and they're wasting water by watering every day, or, well, a lot. But I just wanted, I did a cost analysis study, and it was pretty expensive because I hired some people to help me. But is there a better way to do something less expensive? And how do I present it so that they think it's a great idea? And also, I wanted to say, I have a nephew who lives in Puerto Rico. He bought 7 acres up in the hills, and he grows all his own food, and they do use their poop for fertilizer, which sounds horrible. But he's living off the land, and he and his wife are the Colorado couple, because they're from Colorado, and they're on YouTube if you want to see it. And one more thing, Gavin Newsom for president.
Well, when it comes to DDT, I would recommend everyone read Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. And if anyone's encouraging the use of DDT, maybe, slap them with the book a few times. That's terrifying.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you that in conventional ag, like that, the monetary part is important. I think that you got to start, for me personally, the most success I had in getting somebody to adopt an idea that I had that was, well, not that I had, that was bigger than me, maybe, like regenerative ag, like the things you can't see. I mean, when we formed the NRCS, you heard talk about FDR on a train tour. Hugh Hannon Bennett formed our agency, worked for the Department of Interior. It's a great story on how he got us started, but the Dust Bowl, he saw it, right? He was on a train and saw how bad it was. When we talk about carbon, people can't see that, right? And so it got kind of politicized now, and you might be on one side of the fence of that or the other because it's not as visible. But you know what desertification is. You can see that nothing's growing there. It says we don't have, if you can convince somebody about an idea that isn't as visible, but they can see a connection to it, I think you'll get better adoption of it. And I can just tell you, like, infiltration is a great example. My cover crop out there, I can pound an infiltration ring in for a farmer, and we can measure how much water that infiltration ring, that soil will take in. And when I show that to them, it's not visible driving by, but when I compare a no-till field with regenerative ag, and it's 10 to 15 times the water infiltration rate than a tilled soil, I make that connection. So sometimes it's hard to see, but keep going with different creative ways to get some adoption of the idea.
Yeah, I echo that. Just your passion and your research that you've done is helpful to share, and showing them examples of, there's prairie grasses, there's a lot of native grasses that do really well, but it is tough when our cultural norm is lawns, especially in urban areas. That can be a big change.
No. Also, DDT is illegal.
It was so neat, right?
Yeah.
The nation of that.
For those in the front, DDT is illegal. I'm a local teacher, and I'll be honest, we're completely surrounded by cement, and we have a ton on our plate as teachers, and yet I know, and I'm going to date myself here a little bit, but I remember when reduce, reuse, recycle was
taught in our classrooms, and it seems like something has happened where that's not happening anymore, right? One of the things that I have a hard time with is, and this is a bigger problem because it's education, but we educate children on so many different ecosystems except Nebraska, where we live. How do we get this into our schools? How do we get these ideas into the hands of children who are the ones that make the difference? Because we obviously haven't been listening. But also, that's one question there. And I do know City Sprouts does an amazing job, right? So I'm really thankful for you guys. But then also, how do we get older individuals who are passionate about this to adapt younger people to encourage that passion as well?
I think that's we kind of have a lack of community. A lot of communities are very isolated into like your neighborhood, the kids you go to school with, the people you work with. It's really trying to find ways to build that community, which is why it's one of the 3 tenets of City Sprouts' mission is building communities up so that we are connected together. We can learn from each other. We can work together. 'Cause, I mean, my neighbors, I live in an apartment, and my neighbors all have very different knowledge bases. They have different career fields, and I could learn a lot more from them than I could learn from you two, because it's a lot easier to connect with those people. So I think building up community is so important, and that's so easy to say, build community, but how we do that when we're all, living in the online world, and especially after, COVID, and all of a sudden we're all stuck at home and getting back out in there. It's hard. So finding these community events, workshops, programs, lots of community gardening going on, finding ways to connect with people is going to be the easiest way to build those connections. That's what I could say on that one.
Yeah, I agree. My mom taught the public school system here in Nebraska for 37 years. She got me interested in ecology and conservation, and I think all we did in elementary school was on Arbor Day, we planted a tree. And that's about it. But I can tell you that across the state, so now I'm in this position, I can tell you across the state there are schools building curricula at very early ages, and you're absolutely right. We're going to change cultures. That's where it's got to start. When I look at the room tonight and see all these faces in here, and I'm like, wow, that's pretty powerful. So every little bit of that adds up, and I think that's a great point.
So I've worked with just a few teachers in OPS, and our strategy so far has been to partner with community partners such as City Sprouts, but trying to get the students outside, and it is really hard because there's so little time and so much. And the other thing we've tried to do is use soils as an integrating concept to teach some of these the physics, the chemistry, the biology, and then root it in something that's local. What City Sprouts, or also a Glacier Creek Preserve, is a property UNL owns with restored prairie and agriculture. So we don't do a whole lot of touch points throughout the semester. We got together, I think, last semester twice. So I recognize that time commitment is precious. There's just not a lot of extra time, but doing what we can to just get students outside, touching soil, seeing that it's right under their feet. It has all these amazing properties. And then to the extent that we can have them be curious about it and try and integrate it with their other concepts, that's been what we've been trying to do.
Thank you. And also to answer your point, another way that you can connect students, and especially youth, hi Nancy, connect youth to the amazing opportunities and programs that are happening in the Omaha area community, and also Lincoln and across the state. There's programs like 4-H, there's programs that Number DuPont does, that City Sprouts does. There's even there's several programs at Kiewit Luminarium, there's Culture Kids with MCC. So there are opportunities out there. It's just, frankly, to your point about building community, we need to do a better job about those connections. And sometimes it's just everyone's on a different schedule, so you may be planning for what your kid's going to do during the summertime, or even sharing suggestions in April or May, but being able to share them year-round helps people to remember that when time comes. There's also a really great program with the University of Nebraska Lincoln. That's within their biological engineering department. They have two specific areas of agricultural engineering and biomedical engineering that specifically is looking at how do we develop agriculture for the next generation. So I just checking that out. I was a former biological systems engineering major, so that's how I know. And I grew up in the reuse, recycle era. So going to City Sprouts, that's how I know Nancy, was the now former executive director at NC Products. My question was actually about how we move forward, and I do a lot of advocacy work, and I work with people and systems, and especially advocate issue campaigns and advocate individual campaigns. And when I'm talking to people in Western Nebraska, or I'm talking to people that are in positions of power that can make decisions, the next question is always, so how do we do that? And when it comes time for me to sit down with somebody that has the opportunity to actually, create a regenerative farm, or to create a solution that would incentivize regenerative farming, or at least explain it, their first question is, okay, what does that actually look like? So if you want to do a regenerative farm, what does that process look like, from a tilling solution to a no-till solution? I understand that you can plant, 19 different types of crop to cover an area, but what is that actually, how do you do it? And how not just how do you do it, but how can I explain that to somebody that's interested in it, but may not have all of the tools? Because as much as I will absolutely love this documentary, the audience of something like this, of this documentary, is people that are predominantly urban, and predominantly have, a higher level of education, that may have different values. And so when I'm sitting down with someone from a small town in Nebraska that doesn't really understand why this city girl is sitting down with them and talking about regenerative farming, how do you have that conversation?
Okay, so this is actually something I've been working on recently in the urban and small scale space. So obviously it's a little bit of a different culture when you do speak to someone, from Western Nebraska. But the first thing you want to encourage them to do is connect with the NRCS or the extension office that has access to more resources. Through getting a USDA farm number, they can get grants, they can get where cost share programs. So that way the things like putting in a drip irrigation system to help with water management is not as daunting, because they don't have to worry about how am I going to make this money back? Because it is expensive. I don't want to pretend it's not. I don't want to pretend it's easily accessible. It's not as accessible as it should be. And that's something that through encouraging the use of these programs, they're going to get more money and get more funding to make it a lot more accessible. It's really hard, especially when you look at marginalized communities that don't have a lot of state funding, especially communities that are predominantly people of color, people from the indigenous cultures. They don't get nearly as many resources as they should. And I think it would be shameful to not address that. So the first thing is getting them connected with where the resources are at is going to be the first big step to getting it so that they can start implementing these practices. Another thing would be getting them educated on what the purpose of the regenerative practices are. Because it's so easy to be no-till, it's better for your farm, but you want to actually get them down to why it's better for your farm, because once they know the actual reason they're doing it, it makes it seem a lot more manageable, rather than I'm no-tilling because that's what they say you should do now. You want to actually know what it is, and you can go back to the Dust Bowl, the topsoil erosion. We're still in a state of topsoil erosion, as they said, a third now is gone. It's a really big issue that we kind of said, oh yeah, we planted a bunch of trees and Nebraska became the arbor state, despite there only being one native tree in Nebraska. It's fixed. It's not fixed. It's still a problem.
I agree with a lot of that. I want to back up one more step, though. I have two Gen Z kids, two boys, a 23-year-old and 26-year-old. They are both over here at the Med Center right now studying. But I have to teach them how to grow a plant, right? First, what to do. And then where to grow it. So you talked about the foundations of all those things you talked about. it really boils down to growing something to get started. And then where does the food come from? I tell them, like, is this important to you? So I'm always trying to make it important. If you can inspire that part of it in somebody, then places like City Sprouts are phenomenal at connecting you with resources. So I just would add that to what you're talking about, where, develop a passion and a concern and teach them to grow, and then everything else kind of follows after that, because there's lots of resources for somebody who wants to make a living out of it, or build for your own family because you're concerned about the quality of the food and things like that.
Go. Find me after the panel. We can talk about it more. I got a lot of resources for you.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. Feel free to go ahead and continue talking with them afterwards, but we're going to answer one last question and then we can wrap it up for the evening.
I'm trying to get beyond an us-them mentality. Are conversations happening with our friends in the Farm Bureau?
No, it's not.
That's all you.
Like specifically like what? As far as
All this. Yeah, the soil health and regenerative.
yeah, for government, yes. I mean, we started a soil health initiative 8 years ago. We hired a state soil health specialist, Aaron Hurd. You might have heard of him. Really passionate. He's like Ray Archuleta and me. We're always out trying to work the system and get the information out. The State Department of Agriculture is now, the governor is behind the next step of that initiative. So it's happening at multiple levels. So, I mean, that's part of it, right? Having the resources at least to continue that conversation. It needs to happen in a lot of different places. So I don't want to talk about the politics of it all because I don't know what your politicians are talking about, but I know that as far as the agency people, it's in the forefront of our vernacular right now.
How can we get a copy of that? Yes.
It's on Netflix. So you can watch it on Netflix. Thank you all so much for coming. We'll be out in the lobby if you want to chat some more.